Hi everyone, I'm Kushal. I'm a PhD student at USC. I'll be presenting our work towards emotion-aware agents for negotiation dialogues. Thanks to my co-authors, Rene and Jaysa, who are both interns at my lab who helped in collecting the data set, and also my co-advisors, Gale and John. Let's begin. Negotiations are emotional encounters. They involve complex decisions which often pit individual accomplishments of the participants against sustaining social connections. If you look at the examples on the right, oftentimes when a highly unfair proposition is made, that can hurt their partner's effective evaluation of the outcome in a negotiation, along with getting the best deal at the end, it is also desirable to make sure that the partner feels satisfied at the end and also leaves the positive perception of their opponent. And this is primarily useful in the cases of repeated negotiations where we are considering multiple negotiation between the same pair of participants. And so due to this reason, this can be useful for automated negotiation agents. Such agents find broad applications in conversational AI and pedagogy where they can be helpful in improving access to social skills training. And so in those cases where an agent is negotiating multiple times with the same user, it can be highly important to make sure that the user feels satisfied and leaves with a positive perception about the agent at the end as well, apart from ensuring that the agent tries to maximize its own objective rewards. Many prior efforts in this area to understand the negotiation behaviors and outcomes, many prior efforts, they primarily rely on individual difference variables such as gender and even social value orientation or personality traits. And this is very important since users in many of the industrial setups try to infer these individual difference variables automatically from the online behaviors of users, and that is used to adapt their experiences. But in this work, we are arguing that we're trying to explore if emotion attributes extracted from the immediate negotiation dialogues can further help to explain these various subjective outcomes in a negotiation beyond just the individual difference variables. And so that takes us to our research question in this work, which is for predicting a negotiator's satisfaction and liking for their partners, focusing on the subjective outcomes here. Is there value in leveraging affective attributes from the negotiation itself above and beyond the individual difference variables? So that's the goal for this talk. And to do that, if you want to explore affective attributes, it is ideal to look at more realistic modes of communication between human and the machine. So our focus here is on chat-based interfaces instead of menu-driven, which are more popular in this area. Menu-driven systems are mostly based on button clicks, which allow only for limited emotion expression. But instead, chat-based interfaces can allow for more flexible emotion expression through text messages. And that's what's our focus in this study. So we used those ideas to build a platform based on Facebook's Parlay system, and we collected a data set of over 1,000 negotiation dialogues. We call it the casino data set, and then this data set essentially involves two participants who role play as campsite neighbors, and they negotiate for food, water, and firewood. And so this was a middle ground between uh, providing the flexibility for emotion expression so that they can be studied, and also the concreteness, which allows for a practical negotiation setting. And so this essentially addressed some limitations of prior chat-based negotiation data sets. And the data also contains rich metadata about the participants, their individual differences, personality, and also subjective evaluation, which allows us to extract all the measures required for this study. And so our analysis was based on this casino data set. Talking a bit more about the data set, the design essentially it includes three issues: food, water, and firewood, each is a quantity of three. And each participant negotiates with their own preference order and arguments for needing or not needing a specific item. And so this context which they have that helps to provide interesting opportunities to study emotional expression. We also allowed the usage of four emoticons: joy, sadness, anger, and surprise. And they were also used in our analysis. Further, for outcomes, as I mentioned, they can be objective and subjective evaluation metrics. We collected a total of 1,030 dialogues in English, which contained nearly 12,000 utterances. And so this is the more details about the data set. And finally, coming on to the measures that we extracted, they were individual difference, emotion attributes, and outcomes. The individual difference came from demographics, including age, gender, ethnicity, and the highest level of education, while the personality attributes included social value orientation, which essentially captures pro-social versus pro-self dimension of the participants, and also Big Five personality traits. For the emotion attributes, since we used a more realistic method of realistic mode of communication, we could focus on three different methods of emotion, extracting these emotion attributes. One was definitely coming from emoticons, and this is more towards the capabilities of menu-driven systems involving joy, sadness, anger, and surprise, basically based on the counts of how many times the participants use them in a dialogue. And then lexical, these were finally looking at the text utterances of the participants. This was based on Luke lexicons. Again, their normalized counts in that dialogue. And also we could look at contextual expression of emotion. We used a state-of-the-art deep learning model called T5, which was trained on Twitter emotion recognition data. And we used predictions of that model on the utterances and then combined them to get a score for a dialogue and a participant. And we could extract 6 emotion dimensions from in a contextual manner as well. For the outcomes, as I mentioned, we focused on 2 subjective outcomes. Also discussed in the research question, looking at satisfaction. How satisfied are you with the negotiation outcome? And partner likeness. How much do you like your opponent? And they were also collected from the participants at the end of the negotiation. So these were the measures we looked at. And before going to the actual results of how much emotion attributes can help in the prediction beyond the individual difference variables, we want to do some analysis on the emotion attributes just to validate whether these dimensions make sense, specifically looking at the T5 dimensions based on the deep learning model. So we used 3 different methods. One was correlational analysis, and then looking at the lexical correlates, and then also explicitly looking at the sample predictions made by the deep learning model. So I'll go over them pretty quickly, starting off the correlations. I provide the tables here for completeness, but the key takeaways were that yes, the observations matched our intuition. Essentially, we found significant positive correlations between similar valence attributes and negative correlations among those with opposite valence. And this further essentially validates the predictions of the deep learning model on casino dataset. Most of the correlations were still weak to moderate, indicating some differences, fundamental differences in what each of these methods still captures. Moving on, for the second method of analysis, essentially lexical correlates help us to extract significant words for each of these emotion dimensions. And key takeaways were there again that yes, most of the words were sensible, and they further validated that yes, the extraction method made sense. We found higher associations for T5 and Luke methods as compared to the emoticons, which were able to recognize many more emotive utterances. And I'll also further attest to it using the third method, which was essentially directly looking at the sample predictions of the model. So in this case, we specifically looked at those utterances that were confident predictions from the deep learning model, T5, but they were undetected by the other two methods. So there was no emoticon usage, and also no words from the Luke lexicons, but still these were confident predictions of T5 model. And when we look at these utterances, we observe that the model is able to capture contextual emotion beyond lexical and emoticon usage. And so we expected T5 emotion variables to be better predictors than the other cases. Now, finally, looking at the results of how these emotion dimensions can help beyond just the individual difference variables. Again, to validate, we first looked at correlation analysis, and we found significant trends across the board where individual difference and emotion variables significantly correlate with the outcomes, satisfaction, and likeness. Overall, positive emotions relate positively and negative emotions relate negatively. Some interesting observations based on gender as well. For answering our research question, we performed a primary regression analysis, and we used three different steps in the analysis where we started off with just the individual difference variables, but then added emotion variables for the same participant and then for the partner as well. And this is all the information that will be accessible to an agent who is trying to negotiate with a user, either in an inferred manner or through explicit means. And so the key takeaways from this analysis were that yes, following prior work, individual difference variables themselves account for a minimal but yet significant variance for both satisfaction and likeness. However, more and more variance was explained significantly when we added these emotion variables of the self and partner as well. And in line with the linguistic analysis, we found that T5 variables accounted for much more variance, as you can see in the tables as well, as compared to Luke and emoticon dimensions. All right, just trying to conclude here, emotion variables, we found that they explain significant more variance in both satisfaction and likeness above and beyond the individual difference variables. One can argue that they are just manifestations of individual difference variables, but the significant variance explained that we see in this work, it shows that they are much more than just merely a manifestation. Further, these findings attest to the utility of these affective attributes when emotion difference variables are inferred and not self-identified. In this case, they were self-identified with minimal error, but when they are inferred, then we can expect these dimensions to be useful as well, where potentially would be more erroneous. Finally, a quick comment on the ethical considerations around developing these adaptive negotiation agents based on insights on these human-human negotiation dialogue data sets. Primary concerns essentially are around emotion manipulation, deception, bias, and misinterpretation, and these can creep into the design of the agent, which are based on such realistic data sets. So we argue that transparency and being upfront about the identity and capabilities of the agent is the key here. And known misbehavior should be well laid out for the participants in any study based on these deployed agents. And also regular monitoring should be done to prevent against any offensive or discriminative actions of the agent. Well, that's it from my side. Thank you so much.